Hi, I'm Juliet, the Community Animal Training Supervisor for San Diego Humane Society. I'm joined today by Alyssa and Kelly, who are two of our contract trainers for our Reactive Rover dog training classes. Let's go ahead and talk about reactivity today because it is such a big topic and such a big training question for so many families. So, what I want to start with and what I'm curious about is what does reactivity mean to you? What does it look like?
So when I think of reactivity, I think of dogs with big feelings, as I've heard other trainers refer to it as, big feelings that prevent them from really enjoying their world or the world around them, big feelings that aren't really adaptive for them. This can look like lunging, it can look like barking, it could look like frustration, it could look like growling, it could look like, fear. It could look like a lot of different things.
I agree. I would say it could be fear, fearful, anxious, reactive, hyperactive behavior. So, like Kelly said, barking, lunging on leash, even overexcited dogs. So, dogs that just have a really hard time managing those big feelings. And where I think sometimes communication gets lost in the process. So when you feel your dog is so stressed or worried or maybe overexcited that you're not able to connect with them. So, people that have dogs where you're experiencing that maybe frustration, they would be a great fit for these classes.
So those are really helpful definitions of what reactivity looks like. So when our dogs are experiencing and expressing these sorts of behaviors that you've both described, what sort of skills do they need to be successful? And their owners too. What sort of skills do they need? Because it's never just our dogs behaving.
Yeah.
Where would we start with that?
So I would say starting with the dog, I'm thinking always, I love teaching dogs to check in with different types of distractions or different types of triggers. I love teaching dogs to go to a mat or settle on a mat. All right, we can also refer to that as mat work. We can teach the dog to come to our side and do this in a way that promotes kind of this calm connection for the dog. So the focus is on creating a sense of security for them. So we can also refer to that as heel work, or teaching our dog to come away from some type of distraction or trigger. So it could be that they're barking at the window or they're barking at the fence line. And if we have really good recall with the dog, then that would be really helpful. So recall just being like saying the word come and having your dog spin around and come happily running back to you. So those are some of the skills that I think dogs need to learn. But on the human side of things, we need to learn how to set the stage for success. So teaching those foundation skills first in a really low distraction, calm, relaxing environment. Practice those behaviors to the point of fluency, and then gradually we build those behaviors into real world situations. And that's what the class teaches. And it kind of teaches, the classes are all about, okay, let's work on this exercise this week, and now we're going to build on that in this way, or we're going to start using this in a new environment or with a new distraction. And so it's very gradual, it's very methodical, but that's what the human half is learning how to do, because our initial impulse, I think, is we need to throw the dog into the deep end of the pool. And that almost never works. So we really want to kind of think about those building blocks.
Very cool.
Yeah. I just want to add to that, at least about throwing the dog into the deep end of the pool. That really made me think about it just from a human perspective, because dogs aren't the only creatures that have fears. I mean, we as human beings have fears too. A lot of us aren't particularly fond of spiders. And so a common analogy I like to give is if you're kind of afraid of, let's say, spiders, making you face your fear of spiders isn't going to be particularly helpful. So if I took you to the pet store and, walked you into the middle of 6 tarantulas, so you're surrounded by 6 tarantulas, and I said, it's okay, they're friendly. You need to understand they're friendly. They're here to be, pets. You're okay. And we did this for an hour every week. It probably wouldn't help your fear tarantulas. In fact, I probably wouldn't be a very good friend of yours. And you probably don't be slamming the door in my face the next time I come to bring you to your pet store training there with the tarantulas. And I think it can be kind of similar for our dogs, that we might know that the dog that they are reacting to or that they're afraid of, hey, that is the sweetest dog. Why are you barking at the neighbor's, a little dog there? That dog wouldn't hurt a fly. They're safe. But if it's your dog's reality, that there's, then that's what we have to go with. Just like that tarantula probably isn't going to chase you down, but if you're scared of it, we have to start there.
Right.
Awesome. Yeah. And I love being able to connect some of these big feelings that you mentioned with the fact that, me being afraid of spiders isn't me, like you had mentioned in one of our conversations, Kelly, me trying to give you a hard time. It's me saying, I'm having a hard time. And I think that's such an important way of looking at it, because our dogs aren't trying to do things that are problematic and challenging and difficult. They're experiencing things that are problematic and difficult for them. So meeting them where they are and working from where they are is super important. Tell me a little bit more about the benefits of doing this, online, and how does that actually help the dog move forward and learn how to cope with those challenges if they're never present during the training?
So, we said before that the dog is learning these practical skills and the owner is basically learning how to set the stage for success. And really, so on both sides, there's learning happening. In order for that to be most effective, we want to create an environment where you're both able to focus and feel calm. And so I really think that by doing the classes online, where you're receiving that content, you're receiving that information in a place where kind of like a prime learning classroom. So you're learning all the critical concepts, your dog is learning all the critical skills, and then you're layering on top of that as you go through the weeks and working those things into your routine. And so I really find that this format is so incredibly effective, especially for those reactive or hyperactive or nervous dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that. It's hard for them to learn when they're in the middle of a reaction, when they're in the middle of those big feelings and experiencing that. And by learning these skills within the home, initially, it's a calmer place for them. They can understand it better, and then we can slowly start to transition to other areas, such as by doorways, or maybe right out on your front porch, or maybe in your driveway. We're not going to take that skill, one day from the house and then, immediately apply it by the dog park. There's a whole lot of little steps there and in between.
And I would say, I don't think that people realize how much repetition is needed in training. Sometimes if we're, trying to train in environments that are over our dog's head, that our dog really isn't ready for, we're missing some of that really necessary repetition by starting the training off in your living room. Even if you're doing heel work exercises, people are always surprised to find out that when you start with heel work, the best place to start is in your living room. Your dog is focused, they're learning the behaviors, they're becoming fluent with those behaviors. There's lots of repetition that's happening in the initial weeks. And then that sets the stage so that when you start to take that training on the road, maybe in the third or fourth week of class, you're seeing really, so much more focus and connection from your dog because you did that primary work. You primed your dog. You gave them that opportunity to practice to the point that they are able to offer those same behaviors, even if they are stressed or really excited by something in the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. It's also about creating habits. So even though the dogs might do something really well in class, we're not going to just check it off the box, say, okay, we've got that skill is good. And again, I like to kind of compare that to if you've ever been on a sports team, right? You go to practice. Let's say you're on a soccer team and you do well at practice. Your coach isn't going to say, okay, you guys did great at practice. Take the rest of the week off. See you at the weekend at the game. And it's kind of the same thing with this. Your dogs may do wonderful in class, but you want to continue that practice of those smaller skills so that when you are in real life, the game there, your dog is going to be much stronger. They go, oh, I could, I've done this so much, it's going to be so much easier for your dog to fall back on that, almost like a, let's say, muscle memory. It's not quite muscle memory, but a very similar concept.
But kind of, no, I agree. I talk about that all the time. Even with professional athletes, you see them, they're still, baseball players are still practicing their throw,
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So
they're not in the middle of the game. They are practicing outside the individual skills, and the classes are very much like that, teaching you the individual skills so that you can prepare for the real world.
So we hinted at it a little bit, in this conversation already, and it's something that both of you have brought up to me over the last couple of years regarding your classes, and that's community. It seemed like it's been a really neat benefit that's come out of this that I don't know that we anticipated prior to launching these classes.
I think people really benefit from learning from others, seeing what other people are dealing with, seeing what their struggles are, hearing other people's questions. I think that really kind of alleviates some of the frustration that people might feel otherwise, because if you go out to the park, you might see all the dogs that are able to be out in those environments, and you might be wondering, like, well, that dog isn't acting like my dog is. They're not barking, they're not lunging. It has to just be my dog. I think that doing these classes gives you that feeling of community. You see that actually there's a lot of other dogs that struggle with the same behavior issues, barking, lunging on leash, and that you start to see, you hear other people's stories. You can see how their dogs are doing with the training. You hear, how their dogs are progressing. You can also see what types of training setups they're creating, and that might give you loads of ideas. So I think that element to it is something that, like you said, I don't think it's not something that I realized would be so helpful to people starting off with these online classes, but it's a comment that I receive all the time from people, that that's really one aspect of the class that they really enjoy.
It sounds like it makes a hard behavior feel a lot less isolating.
Absolutely.
So when we're looking at these ranges of behaviors and expressions of behavior from these dogs, what might a timeline look like? Because the class is 6 weeks, which is a good bit of time. But what can, I as a dog owner expect to see in a class like this?
Yeah, I think managing expectations is really important. So I think in 6 weeks, I'm sure Kelly would agree on this. We try to be as comprehensive as we can be in terms of teaching, the skills that the dog needs, and teaching the key concepts that owners need. But that being said, 6 weeks is generally not long enough to see significant behavior change, especially if we're talking about a dog that has more serious issues related to reactive or anxious, fearful, or aggressive behavior. So I always tell people, that I think you'll start to see some of those positive changes. They'll kind of start, in the first few weeks, people will frequently comment and say, oh, wow, I just noticed that my dog is checking in with me more often in these situations. Or, they were just able to, they calm down so much faster than they normally would have. So you start to see these little positive changes, but it's not, a 180 kind of change. So, what to expect. I always tell people that, for behavior modification, if we're looking at maybe more mild to moderate behavior challenges, we're kind of thinking, all right, do some nice structured focus training for a good 3 to 6 months. The training is still going to be woven into your routine, but it's going to start to become a little bit more natural after that point. But if we're dealing with the dog with more severe, more intense behavioral issues, we definitely are going to be extending that timeline beyond that. And that's the part where I think once people find their groove in training, they realize that actually the training itself becomes just a really enjoyable process to be doing with their dog. They can kind of see that their dog feels the same way. Like the dog loves the training, people love the training. And so, yeah, you have that goal that you're working towards, but you're also enjoying what's happening throughout that process.
Actually, to add to this, and I agree with all of that. I think it's a lot of students, if not all of them, see an increase in connection with their dog. Their dogs are really excited to work with them. I see happy wagging tails. I have dogs that go from hardly ever looking at their owners to owners telling me my dog is not taking their eyes off me on walks now. Like, that's not a bad problem to have, considering where we started. I think another huge benefit within the 6 weeks is learning different ways to help your dog recover, because life is going to happen. They're going to have those reactions. How do we help our dogs through that? How do we, what do we do if we see that about to happen? Is there anything that we can do? And that's where those skills come into place from this class. So you don't feel so helpless. You feel like you have options now. Yeah. So your dog might not be perfectly behaved. I mean, none of us are. It's kind of hard to expect our dogs to be perfectly behaved, but it's good to feel that you have some options now.
That's a point that I always bring up, is that people are not trying to train your dog to be a robot. They're always going to have their own feelings about different situations. Sometimes they might go over threshold, and that's normal. We go over threshold sometimes too. But yep, we can also teach our dogs how to come back to calm a little bit faster, or how to have a better connection with us, even if they are in a more challenging situation. And I think that's another thing that people seem to really resonate with, is that the classes are all about developing a better understanding of your dog. And so that's something that I think brings even greater rewards than people realize, right? They come away from the classes just feeling like they have a more harmonious relationship with their dog.
One of the things that I love that, Lisa, you brought up was with the timelines, the fact that it can take 3 to 6 months or longer for things that are more fear-based. And that makes so much sense. Kelly talked about spiders earlier, and if you were trying to reduce my fear of spiders, it's absolutely going to take more than 3 to 6 months. And that's a reasonable expectation. That's really fair. And then, kind of like Kelly was saying, we also know that the training is going to change as your dog is working. It's not going to be, asking for a check-in or focus the same way it was week 1, at week 6. It'll look different. So even though you're doing this training, it will, like you said, Lisa, become more natural. It's going to grow, it's going to develop. So even if it takes a long time, it's going to shift as your dog is shifting and growing, and as you, as the owner, are shifting and growing. And I think that's really, really cool and really beautiful. Talk to me about some of the benefits of this class and some of the beautiful things about being online with these challenging behaviors that are not like simple, straightforward topics. What types of things can we also provide for families who are taking online classes?
So for each class, you get a recording so that you can refer back to that during the week. It's great if there's other family members who, maybe weren't able to be present, and they can still be a part of your training because they have that to view. You have those recordings at the end of the 6 weeks also. It's great to look back at videos. I know myself, I can look at something and can look really easy. And then afterwards, a few days, I'm like, what was she doing there? So for those of us who learn better because we're more visual, being able to look at the recordings can be a really great benefit. There's also additional resources, additional links for demo videos, different articles, things that if you really want to get into depth, you're welcome to. And if you don't want to get into that much depth, you don't have to either. So there's a lot of great options there.
Yep. And so I would just reiterate some of the things that Kelly was just talking about. You know, the classes have the discussion part. So you're learning, you know, one or two main concepts each week. And then there's the training aspect of it, and some of those concepts get kind of woven into those exercises. So you're just learning a little bit about like what's trigger stacking. You know, if we're reading stress signals in our dog, what does that look like? What should you be looking for? What do you do if your dog goes over a threshold and starts barking and lunging, right? So people are learning those concepts. You get the video demonstrations of the actual training exercise. So you can pause, you can rewind, you can take notes. If there's something that you want to share with a family member, you can share that with them easily. And then, you know, I have so many clients that ask me by the time they finish the class, like, will I have ongoing access to this? And I always tell them, absolutely. Like you can refer back to it as many times as you want to. That's what the class is all about. And it makes sense because there's plenty of times, like if you need to just like fine tune some of your training, or you need to like review a certain concept a little bit more. I have people that go back to some of these videos to rewatch all the time.
So our classes have our Reactive Rover classes have two different formats. We have classes live over Zoom, and we have classes on demand. So what might someone expect from each of those formats? There's a lot of similarities between the two, but what do you offer in a live Zoom class, Kelly? What does that look like for
Okay, that's a great question. So for a live Zoom class, I usually start off with everyone giving a really quick update on how their week was, anything that they ran into. I teach some new skills. I will demo with my dog. In the living room, you have an opportunity to ask questions as you see things occurring live. And then after that, you have an opportunity to practice with your dogs. Some people are more visual and they might prefer to kind of watch what the other dogs are doing and listen to the feedback. Some people want to jump into it right away and start practicing with their dog right then there. And that's fine too. I let you know when I have eyes on you. And at that point, you take yourself off mute so that we can have a conversation. Basically, I'm coaching you through the exercise. So I'm watching your dog's body language, pointing things out to you to help make your training more efficient. If there's something that I feel like I can clarify by demoing again, I might do another demo and call the class's attention to something I'm doing with my dog in particular that I think would be helpful for everyone. But it's very much about having a conversation with each person in class about their own personal dog as they're doing that exercise right then and there. So you are getting that one-on-one live feedback and that conversation aspect of it. And a lot of people find that super helpful.
Awesome. So Lisa, your classes are pre-recorded. You've selected a group class that was a really good example of what the class looks like, and they're able to kind of see what those conversations look like with the students in the class. But you also do live support with your students. What does that look like for an on-demand class?
Great. So people have access to the weekly classes, so that you would receive an email and you would have a link to those, to the discussions and the training demonstrations, and you can watch it at whatever time is most convenient. And then if you have questions, you can submit questions for basically weekly office hours. So if you're struggling with a particular exercise, or if you hit any roadblocks as you're starting to apply the foundation training to a real world situation, you can submit your question. And you can either join the live discussion with me and we can chat about it. In some cases, people just submit the question and then they choose to watch the recording.
Awesome. And the on-demand classes are great for the families who need more flexible scheduling needs, especially if the whole family, isn't able to be there, or they all want to be involved, or, they're working as a first responder and don't have regular schedules and have a hard time making those more regularly scheduled classes. We also know that they're really useful for folks who need to get started like right now with a skill because they're getting pressure from, landlords or neighbors or other things like that. And having that ability to start classes when you need it can be really, really valuable for them. So, Alyssa, with the on-demand classes, what types of additional resources and other things like that do you have for your students?
So along the way, I have it set up so that depending on what week you're in, there might be some additional videos or discussions that could be helpful. So for example, I have recommendations for people that have multi-dog homes. So if you're trying to train like 2 or 3 dogs in your home, I have recommendations about how to create that setup. Once you get through the foundation training, I also have suggestions for how to apply the training if your dog is really overexcited with a resident cat, or if they are reactive or hyperactive with guests coming in the home, or if you have kids, a personal favorite topic for me, how to incorporate some of those training exercises in with your kids. So just depending on everybody, might get to a certain point of the training where it becomes kind of your own design a little bit. You might have your own personal needs, and there's resources for you based off of those needs.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining me for this conversation today. And I have to ask, what is your favorite pro tip to share with your students?
For me, it'd be to catch your dog being good. You don't necessarily have to ask for a behavior in order to reinforce it. So if your dog's doing something and you like it, you want to see more of that behavior, be sure that you let them know. Whether it's a good boy, good girl, it's a tasty little treat, it's a quick game of fetch with their ball. But look for all the good things that your dogs are doing and let them know.
Love it. Lisa?
My tip is look at behavior as information, right? So your dog is constantly talking to you. We just need to learn, I think, how to be better listeners, and just kind of seeing that, a lot of times the behaviors that we're seeing that are, the most frustrating for us, usually those behaviors it's your dog's way of telling you that they're overwhelmed, and that they're in over their head. And so maybe recognizing, what is it that just triggered this? How can I maybe take a few steps back and make it a little bit easier for my dog? Yeah, that's my, I think, most important thing that anyone can take away from behavior modification is see behavior as information.
Awesome. Thank you both again so much. Thank you for running our wonderful Reactive Rover classes. Our community loves them, and we've seen so many good things come out of it and so many desired behaviors. So thank you for being that source of support.